This is the O Review podcast. O Review.
Hello, and welcome to the Orange Review. Today I am going to take a look at some citrus of various flavors and varieties, and we're going to determine which ones are best to eat, which ones are best to cook with, and which ones are best for a more fruitful and productive life. So the most common one we have is the navel orange. It's called that because it has a navel. And this one is typically a hybrid, as most citruses are, of some primitive citrus and sometimes double crossbred. So the orange typically has a thick rind, some juicy fruit inside, and it is good to either eat or turn into juice. Now typically a navel orange is more for eating, whereas other sweet oranges, which is the larger group that most oranges fit into, are also good for juicing. Other popular citrus would be the grapefruit, the lemon, the lime, which can be either a Persian lime or a Florida key lime, a Tangelo, or sometimes a tangerine or mandarin orange, and then finally other miscellaneous ones like this one. This one is called a Jamaican Good Hope, or sometimes it's called an ugly fruit if you are racist. So let's take a look at the tangerine. The tangerine, along with the pomelo, which I don't have here, are actually the native fruits that most others are created from. So the nice thing about the mandarin is that it has a very thin skin, which is easily peeled off. I typically grow out my thumbnail, which is good for peeling. So if you see someone else with a long thumbnail, they are either a fellow orange enthusiast or they love cocaine. So as you see, this one peels off very nice, separates into chunks very easily, and typically can be eaten just as is. There's a very good sweet taste to it, and it makes a good snack, and I can usually eat a few hundred of these in a sitting. Moving over to the Tangelo, again, it has a very thick rind, which is a little harder to part from the inner flesh, but is usually not too bad. It's no worse than an orange, and it also depends on ripeness. So I'm going to time-lapse this because I don't think you want to sit here and watch me peel this for an hour. Alright, so here's the last little bit. Pops right off. Again, separates fairly easily. I believe the Tangelo is also related to the mandarin orange or the tangerine, as well as the pomelo, which is not here. Again, you can eat it as is. You don't have to separate the rind from anything. And depending on the breed, it can either taste like a traditional orange, or it can have a more bitter taste, almost similar to pine sol or dusting cleaning agents. So let's go back to that traditional navel orange. Again, the rind is a little tougher, a little harder to get off in one piece, unlike the mandarin orange. Alright, so everything is easy to peel except for that portion there, but again, you can separate it fairly easily. Maybe not as easily as the other mandarin orange inspired ones, but it does have a good taste to it. It's usually fairly sweet, not too bitter, and even though it doesn't separate too easily, you can pretty much eat it inside the rind. So these are a little harder to have as a snack, just due to the difficulty of peeling them and separating them. But as long as you get most of the rind off, they usually spit all over the place. Moving on to the Cara orange. Again, it's still a regular sweet orange variety. It does still have that characteristic navel. But this one's usually a little bit bigger, almost the size of a grapefruit, and typically has sort of a redder inside and is also a little bit more on the sweeter side. All right, with the rind off, we can separate this. Now this one's a little harder to separate, and really this almost feels like it's on par with the grapefruit. It has sort of a darker center that the grapefruit would typically have compared to the lighter sweet orange, but it doesn't really have that same grapefruit smell to it. And when you eat it, it doesn't have a grapefruit taste as well. It does taste a bit more like an orange, even though everything else from the texture to the pulp to the color reminds me of a grapefruit, but it just doesn't have that very sour or bitter taste that the grapefruit has, despite looking like it. On to the grapefruit. Now, grapefruit is probably one of my more favorite citruses. It has a much different taste than most of the oranges. It's a little harder, a little messier. It tends to spit a lot more, but I do like the taste of it a bit more, even though it's a little harder to kind of get into it. Again, the rind is about as difficult, I'd say, as the orange, maybe not as much Definitely not as easy as a tangerine or a mandarin orange, but it does take a little bit to get it off. All right, so typically after you get the main rind off, you have to peel it sort of a second time to get these ones off as well. That allows you to kind of get closer to the fruit itself and have less of an issue when you're trying to peel it apart. Separating it is not as easy as the rest of these, although they do tend to separate in chunks if you can kind of get it right. It's almost like splitting a diamond, so if you've done that before, pretty much the same thing. Now typically, unlike the oranges where you can eat them with the skin on, these ones I try to separate the inner portion, to getting the seeds out, to the point where I can then just eat the inner portion. So basically I just try to peel the outer skin off around the edge, around and down, and then separate the inner portion. So you just end up with this right here without any of the skin. Now you can eat it with the skin, but it's a little bit tougher, so I prefer to do the extra little bit of work just so I can enjoy the inner portion of it. So with just the juicy portion to eat, this is pretty much why the grapefruit is one of my more favorite citruses. All right, so before we move on to the lemons and this, we're going to take a look at this guy here. Due to seasonality, these are available all the time, as well as a few other ones. So this video is pretty much going to take a year to make because I'm going to have to wait for certain things to come into season. So I've got, blood oranges. I've got a regular pomelo, which we don't have here yet, but I will be getting one at some point, hopefully. So let's take a look at this one. It's the Good Hope thing. I believe this is very close to a pomelo, which we don't have here. And it's crossbred with sometimes the orange, a grapefruit, or which in turn are also crossbred with other pomelos, which we don't have here. So let's take a look at getting the rind off this guy. This is probably one of the more expensive ones. The grapefruits are typically about $1.70. The Cara and the other sweet oranges are usually around a little under $1. Mandarins, you can usually get a whole bag of those for a couple dollars. And then lemons and limes are usually like, 50 cents, 60 cents, somewhere in there. This one was $3, and I believe a pomelo, which we don't have here, is about $5, at least the last time I saw it. Could have been due to seasonality. So the nice thing about this guy here, which I believe is crossbred somewhat from an orange or a grapefruit or a tangerine, which pretty much means it could be crossbred from anything. It does have a rind very similar to a tangerine because it pretty much comes right off. It's very thick, but not separated to the inner flesh too much. It has a nice orangey smell to it. And despite the price, which is really the only negative to this, it seems like it's a really nice fruit to it. Alright, so we got some inner strings to it. We can just get rid of those, almost similar to a pumpkin, even though it doesn't taste or smell like a pumpkin, which is a good thing because that would be pretty gross. Let's get the rest of this guy off here. So the innermost section is much lighter than any of these other ones here. It's almost a very pale yellow, almost to a white. A lot more strings and guts and stuff, which I'm not as used to for the other citruses. But let's get one section here and see what it looks like inside. So I assume due to the texture of this, similar to the orange, you could probably eat it with this on, but let's try to peel that off a little bit more and see what we got going on inside. So peeling the outer skin is not as easy as something like a grapefruit, so I would be almost inclined to possibly eat this like an orange, although I feel some sort of harder sections inside, which might make eating it a little bit more difficult. Certainly is juicy though. It is a little bit more bitter, a little bit more bland, certainly not as sweet as the regular oranges or any of these other ones. It does have a good taste to it. I almost feel like you have to eat some of the outer end of it because that does add a little bit of flavor. Normally the flavor is usually locked into the pulp, but in this case it's almost a bit more like you really kind of have to eat some of the skin around it. The inner portion is, I don't want to say it's gross, but it's getting there. But definitely eating the skin around it actually gives it a bit more flavor, so the rind almost helps with the overall experience with this. I would probably not buy this again, just due to the price and whatnot, but it does give you a lot compared to the other fruits. It's certainly one of the bigger ones. Moving on, let's take a look at the lemon. I managed to cut myself, so this makes it really interesting every time I open up one of these things with a heavy bit of citric acid. I'm sure once I get to the really sour ones, it's going to feel really good. All right, so let's take a look at a lemon. This is one of the few ones that is not a hybrid of anything. It's just a native lemon, which occurs in this mixed bread with a lot of things. Taking a look at these different limes here. The lime is actually a crossbred from a lemon and something else. And then a key lime is a variant of that, which is a little bit different. So let's first take a look at the lemon here. Now this one, I don't know if peeling it is usually the best option. Oh wow, that really, yeah, that feels special. You can peel the edge off here, but typically that doesn't yield too much. So what you'd probably want to do with a lemon is cut it in half and then usually squeeze out the juice of it. So for the purpose of being thorough, I will attempt to peel off the rest of this rind and see what we can do with the pulp and how it differs with everything else. All right, so we got that lemon peeled. Let's see if we can separate it easily. A few seeds in there. Yeah, so compared to the other ones, this one really doesn't want to come apart as much. It's a bit more firm, a bit more compact. I think it's partially due to the fact that these are usually picked, not used typically when they're fully ripe, unlike the rest of the fruits, because they're not really meant to be eaten like oranges are. Now it looks like the skin does come off a bit more easily, just like the grapefruit does, so the inner pulp can come right out. So let's give that a taste real quick. Good sour kick to it. Not as sour as a lime, because those are typically picked before they're ripe. A lime, when it's ripe, will actually look very similar to a yellow lemon, with a bit more of the yellow rind and whatnot. But, you know, for most purposes, they're picked before they're ripe, just for whatever reason they have. All right, let's cut open that lime. So we have a bit more green in the center compared to the yellow lime. And peeling it is going to be pretty much more similar to the lemon. Doesn't really want to come off as easily, and it's really not meant to do that, although it looks like it's actually peeling off a little bit more easily than the lemon. A bit thinner of a rind, so it's a little stubborn, and the fact that this is thinner means these are usually a little bit more perishable too. So let me finish this up and we'll take a look at it. Alright, so let's peel this guy open, see if we can separate it. As these get smaller, they're getting progressively hard to separate into segments. I'm sure with a little bit of brute force we can get those open. Alright, let's grab a section in here. They are very dry, very compact. Doesn't give you as much juice as, you know, one of the larger fruits, especially since they are picked before they're ripe. The acid just hits right at the back of your mouth. Definitely much more flavorful. Of the whole ultra sour citruses, I definitely like lime more than lemons. Very good in key lime pie and lime whatever you want to put it in. And then moving on to the last one, we have the key lime. Now, the key lime is slightly more tart. Typically, this would be the key lime that would be in key lime pie. Very, very thin rind and doesn't have as much juice, obviously, because it is smaller, but it's usually preferred when making that specific pie. These are a bit more seasonal. They're only available certain times of year, whereas the Persian are usually pretty much all year round because they come from a different climate. So let's take a look at this guy here. Moving on to the rind of this one, it's going to be a bit more tough to peel because it's very thin, it's very small, and it really doesn't want to come away from it. But with a little bit of force, we can kind of get this off and figure out what we have going on underneath. All right, so there we go without the rind. Very compact, very hard. Again, because they are picked before they're primed, so they don't have that ripeness factor that most other ones have. Like the grapefruit, you can usually do a secondary peeling and get a lot of that extra outer rind off. So let's do that a little bit just to see if we can get on the inside and separate this guy. All right, pull it apart real quick. There we go. All right. This actually separates a lot nicer than the other lime. I'm not sure if it's just because it's more compact or any other reason, but let's take a look at the intersection. Seeds are pretty big compared to the fruit, but the flesh separates pretty nicely. You can get to the inside. So that's definitely more tart than the regular Persian lime. Definitely has a little bit different taste. I like it. That would be definitely good in some sort of food or pie or something like that. All right, welcome back to another portion of this. It's been a few months, but we've had a few new options in season. So it looks like the key limes are gone. We just have the normal Persian limes. I did end up picking up a Meyer's Lemon, which is a little bit bigger than the normal lemon that I've seen. It's also supposed to be a little bit more sweet. I also grabbed a Valencia Orange, which is sort of almost the same size as the navel, but the skew code is different, so might just be, or definitely is probably just sort of a line breeding of a different sweet orange. I do have a normal tangerine, which I had last time, but I'm just bringing back for comparison. And then I have a Clementine, which is sort of a little bit smaller than a tangerine. It's related, so it's definitely more related to the mandarin, and it has a distinctive taste. So if you've had the mandarin that's been canned, then shame on you, but it's something that's very distinctive. It's also the same flavor that we've had in something like Ecto Cooler. All right, so let's take a look at this. These ones I've been really taking a liking to. They don't peel quite as easily as the tangerine. The tangerine skin's a little bit more firm. It separates from the innards a little bit better. But since it is related, it doesn't come off with too much of a fuss. It definitely has a scent that's very similar to like the Tangelo. Probably because they're a bit closer to those mandarin roots than the sweet orange. I believe this is actually a cross between a sweet orange and a mandarin, so it's two different orange blends, but the orange, of course, is in turn bred from a couple of their citrus plants, so it does have one of those true fruits as a direct related. So as you see, the skin peels off pretty easily, not too bad. Separates also, and then the pieces are a bit smaller, so if you compare that to the tangerine, skin comes off very easily. And of course you can unlock that achievement if you get it all off in one piece. So different size difference, a little bit color changing as well. So this one's a bit more yellow, this is more of a deeper orange. But again, if you've ever tasted a mandarin orange, these are pretty much a dead ringer for it. Alright, so taking a look at the Valencia Orange. Differs a little bit than the navel. I feel like it has a better taste to it. It was sold in the organic aisle, so I don't know if just that has anything to do with it, but I just feel like the taste on these is a bit, I don't know, a bit sweeter, a little bit more of something I'd probably eat on its own versus the navel, which would be more better for like a juice. Separating isn't too bad. And again, I really think the taste on these is much better than like the navel. So the navel ones, they tend to have this big mass right here. So where that navel is, there's a bit of fruit which kind of doesn't really form the normal segments that we're used to. So you end up with kind of this knob that's a little bit, useless. The Valencia Orange doesn't have that. It's a little bit smaller, a little bit more easy to part. I feel like the navel oranges, sometimes they break in the middle, or they end up just sort of like one big mass. Also, the Valencia Oranges do have a lot of seeds in them. Not a lot of seeds, but more than like the seedless navels that have been bred for recently. So every once in a while you kind of come across a seed and you have to spit it out, but it's not too much of an issue. Alright, so last one for today, we're going to take a look at the Meyer's Lemon, and let's see if this is truly as sweet as they claimed. I'm going to try to peel it. Normally I cut lemons and limes in half because the rinds aren't usually as forgiving as the oranges. Definitely has a really good smell to it. More of that like true lemon smell as opposed to like the fake pine sol thing that we're used to. But yeah, actually peeling this is much better than the traditional lemon that I'm used to. I mean, it almost peels the same as one of either the sweet oranges or one of those varieties. But just the way the rind is coming off, this is reminding me much more of like a sweet orange. That would make sense because if you bred a lemon with something that's a little bit more edible and a little bit more sweet, then you're gonna take that acid off and you're gonna not have something that's too bitter. All right, I almost wish I had another lemon. I probably should have bought one just to kind of compare the two. But separating the two, much easier. Still have the distinctive yellow color to it, but the pieces, they separate really easily. Almost reminds me of the consistency of a grapefruit because you can peel that outer skin out and get right to the inner flesh. And then they come apart pretty easily. So let me taste one of those. It's really good. You can definitely eat these. I mean, I know I was eating the lemon and limes before, but they kind of, after a while, they got to your stomach and they weren't really too good to eat. But Well, you could definitely eat this as a snack. Probably wouldn't make a whole, snack out of it, but you can definitely eat a piece and not have it like, really revolt too much, because it's really not that acidic. It's a little bit of bite, but all right, so there we go. Meyer's Lemon. We got the Valencia Orange. We got the Tangerine, which I had before, and then we got the Clementines. All right, so let's take a break and let's cook something with some citrus. So today we're going to make a key lime pie. Pretty easy, just a couple ingredients. Limes, sweetened condensed milk, eggs, and then if you want to make a pie crust you can, or you can just get one off the shelf, which is usually a little bit easier. All right, so let's take a look. We're going to start mixing first the condensed milk, and then just the yolks from 3 eggs. So just pour the contents of the sweetened condensed milk into a bowl. Does that remind you of anything?
Whoa. Whoa, that's so cute, Daddy. That's so cute, right, Daddy?
Yep. First, crack the eggs into a Pyrex container. We only want the yolks, so we're just going to put them all in here first. Then we'll extract the yolks and put them with the condensed milk.
That's so cute, Daddy. That was amazing.
If you want to save the shells, you can use them for compost or for some other craft later. Alright, so now comes the part where we add the lime juice. So I'm going to use a compressor squeezer here. I used to use a pair of pliers because that's all I had at the moment, but then I decided to actually get something that was appropriate so it wouldn't be as awful. First, what you want to do is you just want to cut the key limes in half, trying not to cut yourself. And if you do cut yourself, then stop the bleeding before you continue so it doesn't mix into the batter. You want to put one of those in the squeezer and then just squeeze. There we go.
Daddy?
Now you may want to be tempted to put the round side because it matches, but that's usually not the best way for small ones like this. I prefer to put them the other way around. That way the juice comes straight through the strainer and it almost flips inside out as you squeeze.
That is perfect, Daddy.
Just repeat that for a whole 1 pound worth of key limes and you should get enough juice to have about 3/4 to a cup of juice, and then mix that into the batter here.
That was good, Daddy, right?
So while I'm doing this, sort of reminds me of a story my father told me. It was about a man who was fasting, and towards the end of his fast, he was so hungry, he didn't have much energy left. So at the end, he found this cabinet, or this chest full of chili peppers, and he lifted up the lid and put himself inside, and he was so weak, he couldn't get the lid back off once he had it trapped over his chest. So he decided to just start eating all the chili peppers, and he ate every single chili pepper that was in that chest. And when someone finally came home and found him, they pulled him out, he turned to him and said, "Could you get me a glass of milk?" Alright, so normally you'd use this to sort of zest some of the rinds off the limes and put it on the top of the pie, but that sort of creeps me out. So what I'm going to do is just use this as a strainer, just to get any seeds that kind of missed through the initial part. So just pour in the lime juice in here very slowly. There we go. Catch all those seeds. And that pretty much made exactly 3/4 of a cup, which is what we wanted for that pound of limes. And now I'm just going to beat this real thoroughly so it's nice and creamy. Alright, so a very important step is to make sure you take the plastic off the pie crust, because if you leave the plastic in there, it's not going to end up getting onto the pie crust. And then when you put it in the oven, the plastic will melt and it'll have this really kind of funny taste to it. Usually not preferred when you're doing it the proper way. So just get that cover off real quick. We'll also use that as a cover later when we put it into the fridge. So now that this is sort of all done, just give it a quick pour in there. Should fill it up pretty nicely. There we go. And then what you're going to do is you're going to put this in the oven at 350 degrees for about 15 minutes. You could do this raw, but certain eggs have salmonella or other illnesses that might be not so good to eat raw. I used the brown eggs because brown eggs are local eggs and local eggs are fresh. But I'm going to bake it anyway just to sort of make sure there's no issues. Once it's done baking, then we're going to put some whipped cream on it and then put it in the fridge to solidify. All right, quick update here. We've moved forward to September, and at this point we have had not too many things other than the usual bulk oranges, grapefruits, lemons, and limes. The occasional tangerine. Every so often I do see some key limes. But what I did find was some kumquats from Chile. So I want to pick these up. Supposedly you can eat these with the rind. So we're going to try one of those today and see if that works. I'm also going to peel one just to see what the pulp is like. It's billed as something that has sort of a tender rind but a very tart pulp inside. So we're going to see if that holds true. So let's give this a try. Alright, so let's first peel one just to see what it's like on the inside. Ooh, definitely smells like a citrus. Let's get a napkin down here so I don't make a mess. The rind does not separate from the pulp too easily. In fact, this is probably why they recommend just eating it with the pulp. So I'll try that next, but I just want to see if I can at least get to the inside to some degree. Alright, so I don't see any good way to separate this. I can try to dig in there. No, that's not working. Alright, I'm just going to eat this thing whole just to see how it tastes. It's not bad. It's got sort of almost a butteriness to it. Probably from the fact that a lot of the rind was still part of it. But it does have a little bit of tang like a lemon, in addition to some sweetness like an orange. It's almost like a more sour orange to a degree. I'm just going to eat this tangerine real quick, or this mandarin, just to kind of get a quick taste comparison while it's fresh in my mind. But let's just try one with a rind now, just to kind of see how that tastes. Pick a smaller one. That's definitely not bad. I don't think I've ever eaten a citrus with the rind before, but it really kind of works. Definitely is a little bit harder to chew, it's a little bit tougher, but the rind really doesn't take away much from it. Doesn't really get in the way of the pulp. It doesn't feel like you're really chewing through a lot of fibrous material. So it's really not bad. I'm just going to cut one of these open real quick just to see what a cross section looks like. So as you can see, there is a lot of rind versus the pulp. So really the segments are a bit thicker, the rind kind of goes all the way down. Probably why I had a little bit of trouble getting through and finding something that was actually inside it, because there really is just those 5 unique segments of it with a couple extra seeds, which I didn't feel in the other ones. Let me see if there's a... Yeah, I guess I just ate the seeds and they weren't too much of a problem. I didn't taste the seeds in a lot of the other ones, so I'm guessing that even though they are kind of big, they really don't feel like much. But yeah, good orange state to it, a little bit of tang, so it's almost like kind of like a sour, more of a sour orange than a sweet lemon. I wish I had those Meyer lemons still, because I would have been able to compare those two, but I say it's more on the orange side. Alright, so here we are in November. No sign of blood oranges yet, but I did find another one. This is curiously called the sour orange. Like everything, it seems to be a mix of a pomelo and a tangerine or a mandarin orange. And basically it just seems to almost be like a line variation of that. So I had a few earlier. It's like almost like a cross between orange and a lemon. It's a little bit more sour than an orange, not terribly good to eat, very thick rind. Not so much like a Meyer's lemon, but it's, I don't know, not really sure what it's for, maybe just for flavoring or something. So let's take a look. We'll cut one in half and then we'll peel the other one. So the thing with these is they are full of seeds. There is, for every rind here, it's almost entirely full of more seeds. There isn't a whole lot of pulp here to eat. So when you do peel these or try to bring them into sections, you end up with just a ton of empty space once you get all those seeds out. And for every one you see, there's usually 2 or 3 more behind it that you don't see. And that goes for both sides. So as far as taste goes, it is very sour. It lives up to its name. It definitely is a sour orange. And the rind, as you see, is much thicker than most oranges you might see. It is much closer to a lemon than an orange, even though it sort of has a distinctive shape and color of an orange. Peeling it has been somewhat challenging just because the rind is pretty thick. It's not too bad to get off, but once you do get the outer rind off, you do have a lot of the inner part that's still left, so you'd have to kind of work on that once you get the main rind off. Not only that, but once you get it, it reduces in size quite a bit. So it does separate pretty easily compared to the other ones. And the color is, again, much closer to almost like the Jamaican Hope one. It's a very light color. Isn't too much of the orange that we would see like with a Cara orange or something like that. But again, these seeds, they're just everywhere. So there's all the seeds that we got in that one. 1, 2, 3, 4, plus a few mini ones. So per section, that's really all the pulp that you end up getting. Oh. Now, when I first got these about a month ago, they were a little bit sweeter than this, so it almost seems like they get more sour the longer they're out. This tastes a lot like a lemon at this point. When I did it earlier, it was more like sort of like a slightly bitter orange. And it's actually related to the bitter orange. But, yeah, so that's pretty much it for this one. Really, I'd say maybe if you wanted to use this for flavoring for something a little bit tart, you could probably juice it, not too bad. But I certainly wouldn't have this as a snack or anything like that. Let's see how well these juice. So the other thing is that they are extremely slimy. I haven't really seen this in much of the other ones, but when you pull them, they almost like slip right out of your hands. And when you're done, they have like this fine film on it, which is not entirely pleasant. All right, so let's drink that juice. I need some sugar. Wow. So not bad. 2 oranges gets you, a good half cup, so it's not too bad. I suppose if you add a little bit of sugar to that, made some sort of like sour orangeade, it'd probably be pretty good, but probably not something I'll buy again, but I figured it was just something worth picking up. All right, it's been a few more months. It's now December, and I did find the Pomello. I joked in the beginning that we didn't have an example of this, but now we do. So the interesting thing about the Pomello is that this is the source of most citrus. So this, in addition to the Mandarin orange and maybe 1 or 2 other, everything else is pretty much a hybrid of that. So eventually I'm going to have some diagrams as to what fruits came from what other fruits, but for now we're going to take a look at one of the originals. So at a glance it looks very similar to a grapefruit. In fact, I thought it was a grapefruit when I saw it in the store, until I saw the sign and realized it's a whole lot bigger than a grapefruit, and it's a lot more firm, but it does have that normal textured skin, and it supposedly has sort of a dark inside and an easy to peel skin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel part of it, and then I'll do a cross section just so you can kind of see what's inside. Let's dig in. Alright, so the rind is about as thick as a grapefruit, not too bad, and it seems to come off in a pretty easy section. Oh yeah, much easier. So not quite as falling away like the ugly fruit or like a tangerine or something like that. It is adhered somewhat to the inner flesh a bit, but it isn't so tough that I'm not able to get it off in large sections. It's definitely smelling sort of like a grapefruit, but more like an orange, so you can kind of see where the normal sweet orange comes from this. So the other downside to this is, even though it's much bigger, this is like $5. So whereas normal grapefruits are like usually $1.25, $1.50, somewhere in that range, you can get a couple of them. $5 just gets you 1 big fruit. So we'll see if it is worth the money. Right, so there's a section here which seems a little more tougher than the outside. So I don't know if that's the way it grows or if it's just a little bit more adhered to that. But it's definitely proving a challenge to get most of it off this back section here. And as you see, the center stem and the bottom part there are more lopsided on this as well, so almost like it grows out from one direction. Very fun. Let's do a quick cross section to see what we're looking at here. All right, interesting. So, unlike most fruits which have very even ones, it almost looks like we have some smaller ones going in here. Not too many seeds, which is nice. It's always good when things aren't 100% seeds, like either the sour orange or the other. But as you can see, the rind is much thicker in this part as well. So let's try to get out one of these sections real quick. And very similar to a grapefruit, it does seem like the inner coating holds it together pretty well, so the inner sections come out somewhat easy. Unlike oranges or the things like that, where you tend to eat sort of the inner rind in addition to the pulp, this one is more like a grapefruit where you can pull the pulp right out. That's very good. A little drier. It's not quite as juicy as a grapefruit, which is sort of a plus because sometimes the grapefruits, when you eat them, they just get so moist that it's all over the place. Although I wish I could sort of section this a little bit more easily. Let's get these inner sections out. There we go. All right, so that looks just dreadful. It looks like when a horse is born, their hooves aren't really formed and they have this little tendrily look to them. So I won't eat that section because that's probably just gonna give me nightmares. I tell you, if it weren't for the price and the fact that it is getting to be somewhat difficult to really get this thing apart. Oh, here we go. Okay, so once we get it quartered, we can get that outer flesh off a lot more easily. So this is very, again, very similar to a grapefruit. If you're on a budget, I say stick with a ruby red grapefruit. But if you do see these in the store, these are actually really good. There's the pomelo. I'm not going to spend the rest of the video dissecting this and eating. I'll probably just try to get as much as I can and I'll have it later for lunch or something. But yeah, again, these are the building blocks of most citrus, and you can definitely see why. All right, exciting times. The time has come where the thing I've waited for all year is finally in season. I had a hunch. I was heading through the grocery market and I decided to check out what kind of citruses they had, and lo and behold, right in the middle of the normal bulk oranges and the normal grapefruit, we had blood oranges. And I've been wanting to get these back since last year around this time when I saw them. So I thought they should be in stock, or should be in season or so right now. But basically when I saw the pomelo in stock, that was around the time. So when I saw the pomelo a few weeks ago, I figured they'd probably be coming shortly. So the thing with the blood orange is that it has a very dark inside, darker than most anything, even like the ruby red grapefruits. This thing is got a very sweet taste to it. It's a little bit more flavorful than a normal orange. It's on par with like a normal tangerine or something like that, but I just kind of like it for the coloration and the fact that it's so different. So taking a look at normal blood orange, some of them range from just normal orange peel to like a really dark red. And if you take a look at the inside, it's got just a bright red inside. And it ranges from sort of like a neutral peach color to a very dark red crimson. Some more than others. It really kind of depends on which one that you open. As far as peeling them goes, it's a little tougher than a normal tangerine, which is usually one of the more easy ones to peel. So the rind is sort of thin, and you usually end up kind of getting right through to the pulp fairly easily, so it's kind of hard to just get the rind off without damaging much of the pulp inside. But it is possible.
I want to peel.
You want to peel? Here you go.
Wait, no. I want this one.
No, not with a knife.
Okay.
So as you're peeling it, as soon as you pierce that pulp inside, it starts bleeding all over the place. And it is a very dark crimson too, so it doesn't really stain much, but it kind of looks like it should because it gets all over everything as soon as you start piercing into that. So since it has very thin rind, getting into that pulp is usually kind of an easy thing. So it's very hard to get it like off in one piece, but usually it doesn't really matter that much. So there it is. For better or worse, it tends to take a little bit of effort to get it all taken apart. Usually there's only like 3 or 4 seeds in it, and usually only one of the 2 of the sections has those seeds, so it's really not too bad. Definitely not seedless, but not as bad as like the sour orange, which had seeds like everywhere. And then there you go. So as you see, compared to this one, which has a little bit of like peach inside, this one was one of the darker crimson ones. So as far as taste goes, I've had it reported that it has more of like a raspberry taste. I don't really see it as having like a raspberry taste too much. So it took me a little while to get to this video because I had to have some time to do it. So a lot of these oranges are actually starting to get a little bit old at this point. So I'm going to take the rest of these and I'm going to make sort of a blood orange juice.
I would do that.
All right, ready? All right, so here we go.
Wow, getting strong. Can I see what's in?
Right, hold on.
Ooh, I don't like blood. Can I see?
All right, so there's the mash. Let's do the next one.
My turn. My turn. My turn. My turn. My. Wow, there's a little bit blood here. There's a little bit blood here.
All right, so there's the mash of the inside, all nice and bloody. And I said it didn't stain, but yeah, once you get enough of it on you, it does tend to stain a bit. Clean up some of this. We'll come back after we've squozen in a few of these, and let's see what it looks like. All right, so I did about half of them, and I've got about a half a cup worth. I'll probably do the rest of these later, but I don't want to chew up too much more time.
Okay, guys, watch me when I drink it.
So it's on par with like a lemonade that's been slightly sweetened. So there's enough natural sweetener in the orange itself to take away some of the tartness, but there is still a little bit of it there. So we have a couple other things that sort of look similar. So last year I had opened something called a Tangelo, and this one's also being called a Miniola, which I believe is just sort of a synonym, just another name kind of for the same thing. So these two are the Tangelos. These ones are Sumo Citruses. Now at first they kind of look similar because they do have that distinctive bump on the top, but the Tangelo has a little bit more of a smoother rind to it, whereas these ones have much rougher, almost like it's on par with like almost like the sour orange or sort of the ugly fruit or the Jamaican hope. So I haven't opened these yet, but I'm going to take a look at them real quick. So let's first take a look at the Tangelo, just because we did take a look at that last time. Just going to cut the top off there, make it a little bit easy. And these ones, if I recall, they had sort of very distinctive flavor to it. It was not sweet. It was almost like a Windex, you know, kind of like a fake lemon. So it did have sort of a, you know, definitely a citrus vibe to it, but it didn't have anything strongly resembling like a traditional orange or a traditional lemon or something like that. Even like the clementines and the halos and things like that had their own distinctive taste. So I also believe that a lot of times things also have like the different names or sometimes the same names, even if they're slightly different, a lot of times for branding. So this one actually peeled pretty easily, and then the sections come apart very nice. I don't really see anything in the terms of seeds. So as far as eating goes, if you want like a snack, it looks like the Tangelo is really kind of up there, which I believe is why it's sold as sort of like a snack one. It does compromise, unfortunately, in taste, because it has a very, very bland taste. Only a little hint of flavor. The rest of it's just a lot of like juice. If you do like a juicy like one, then it's definitely going to be good, but it really kind of sacrifices some flavor. Alright, so let's take a look at the Sumo Citrus. I'll take that off as well. So again, easy to peel rind. Once you get that knob off, it's a little bit more roundish in shape, whereas the Tangelo kind of had more of a elliptical. Alright, so it looks like the rind is a little bit more difficult than the Tangelo. It doesn't quite come off as easily on the bottom, but not too bad, not like the blood orange, which was rather difficult. Alright, so let's separate the halves here. And what we have is something that looks a lot more like a traditional orange. So even though the outsides were very similar, the insides were quite a bit different. So opening this up real quick, the pieces do separate, you know, fairly easily. Much better flavor on this one. So hands down, this is almost like eating nothing. There's really just barely any flavor to it. This one has a nice rich texture, almost like this, like an orange, but so much more sweeter. I mean, these things I probably should go back and find some more. I have to say, these are a real pleasant surprise. The flavor, the sweetness, it's kind of like everything you want in a citrus. I mean, if you like a tart flavor, it's not going to have that, but if you like something that's almost like eating candy, this is really it. So Sumo Citrus, definitely one of my highly recommended ones. Hello. Alright, I found a few more things. So I was in the grocery store the other day and I saw these, and I know blood oranges are still in season, so do grab those before they're gone. But I saw something called Rupee Tangos, and I'm thinking mango, tangerine. So I looked at it, and basically it's a crossbreed between a mandarin orange and a blood orange. So we end up something like this. A little bit bigger. I don't have any blood oranges at the moment, but basically it's a little bit bigger, but it's kind of got a different texture to it. Very similar to the mandarin or the tangerine. And then also I still have a couple of the Sumo Citruses around, and last time I took a look at these I wasn't really sure what they tasted like, but pretty much they were a dead ringer for mandarins. Which is different than a tangerine. A tangerine is close to a mandarin, but it really has a distinct taste to it. I also found this thing called an Heirloom Navel Orange, which I believe is probably just sort of a line bred one, which people have just selectively bred to have a different taste. So we're going to take a look at those. So let's first take a look at the Heirloom Navel Orange. So like most navel oranges, they're going to have sort of a thinner skin that doesn't really come off too easily. It's going to be adhering to the inner portion fairly well. And as you see, the inner pulp is a very light yellow, which is common with most of the navel oranges versus like the Cara oranges, or of course the blood oranges. So of course the sweet orange or the navel orange is closely related to the pomelo, and then the sour orange, which of course the sour orange is not something you want to eat by itself. They still sell them, I still see them in sort of the exotic fruit section, but it's not something you really want. So don't have any normal navel oranges on hand to compare it to, but just based on look, you know, it doesn't peel too bad. I've had worse. And then they separate pretty easily, and of course, with most oranges you can eat it right with the skin on it. Sort of a semi-sweet, sort of neutral flavor to it. Definitely good for eating. These will probably be really good for juicing as well. The Sumo Citrus and a tangerine, the benefits of both of these is that they peel very easily. So a tangerine, basically just go into it, and pretty much you can get most of the skin off in one piece. Not too much of an issue. Same thing with the Sumo. The nice thing with these is they have the bump on it, so you can almost kind of lift the bump off. And this one's even more. You'll notice there's almost like a gap of air between the skin and the inner portion. So these ones are very easy to peel because they really don't have any effort, and it's almost like they're almost dissected for you before you even get the skin off. And then we have the Rupee Tango, which again is probably a designer name for the crossbred, but basically it says that they are a cross between a Clementine mandarin and a Tarraco blood orange. So we're going to assume that, like the mandarin orange, the skin peels a little bit more easily. I'd say it's probably halfway between like a navel orange, which is a little bit more difficult, and then the Sumo Citrus or the tangerine, which is much easier. But as you see, it's really not too bad. I might have to peel a couple of these because it looks like I peeled one before and it actually had sort of more of a blood orange center to it. So let me grab a couple more and see if we can find one that's a little bit more different. Ah, here we go. So even with blood oranges, you do have some variability with the color in it. I've had some blood oranges which are deep, deep purple, and then other ones that were less so. So this was a little bit harder to peel, but it's giving me a little bit better color to it. So if you look over here, it's a little bit darker, a little bit lighter on the top. And we have much better color. So even though these are really the same thing, we have much different color. And the cool thing is it's almost like a marble too, like it's not uniformly darker, it's like even in the same segment we have some different coloration. I peel back some of the skin so you can kind of see. So it's almost like the deep center. It's almost like a steak, like the middle's pink and the outside is a little bit lighter. Taste-wise, much closer to the blood orange. Kind of has almost that bitter taste to it, compared to you know, something like a Sumo, which is going to be almost like eating a candy. Other thing, this is like has a extra sweet taste, but also an extra sour to it. This is more like a bland taste to it. The tangerine. Pretty much pure on the sweet and tangy side. And then let's see if there's any difference with the deeper yellow one. This almost tastes exactly like a regular navel orange. So it seems like as it gets darker in color, it seems to generate more of that flavor to it, and it kind of gives it a little bit more of that tang. Overall, not bad. Probably wouldn't buy them again. Probably just grab, you know, some regular blood oranges or whatnot, but definitely get the Sumo Citrus. These are a bit more expensive, $3 a pound, so if you grab like 5 of them, it ends up being like $7, $10. So they are a bit more expensive, but they are very, very good. Obviously, you know, the halos and the mandarins or the tangerines are, you know, pretty cheap. You can usually get a 5-pound bag for $5, so that's not too bad. And then, yeah, that's it. So we'll see if I find any more before we're done, but as for now, we'll continue.
This is the O Review Podcast.